Excellent, excellent. Well, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. My name is Ben Wharton-Hunt. I'm really going to host and moderate this Blab. Quick bit of information about me. I'm one of the social media marketing managers here at CA Technologies. I'm based out of San Francisco. As you may tell, I'm originally from the UK, from London. I moved over here about 8 months ago. So this is very exciting for us as a company. This is our first Blab. It marks the start of our Agile Week, sort of a social takeover on Agile. So we have some really fantastic new video content that's being released across all of our social channels, which I'll share with you very soon. In them, we look at issues such as how to get started with Agile. Of course, we're going to cover that today. Scaling Agile for your enterprise, and also how to build a culture of collaboration across Agile teams. So a lot of great content. Again, I will post links throughout this session to various video content and, of course, all of our social channels. So you can go over there and follow us. So, most importantly, I'm joined today by two colleagues, two of our most experienced Agile coaches. So first of all, we have Eric. Eric is leading the Agile advisory team for CA. He's currently focused on the overall transformation of our product development capabilities. And prior to this, he led one of the US transformation consulting teams and has been a consultant on enterprise, agility, and architecture for years. So Eric, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ben.
And my second colleague, we're very lucky to have with us, is Ronica. Ronica leads the Agility Services Excellence team for CA. This team supports our consultants in the field via thought leadership and continuous improvement efforts. She's been a leader in the Agility Services group for the last 5 years. And she was also a transformation and Agile consultant working with our enterprise customers before that. So over the next 60 minutes or so, we're going to cover as many issues as we can. Very importantly, this is about engaging with the experts. So if you have any questions, if you have any challenges, no matter how big or small, and you'd like Erica and Ronica to chime in and see where they can help, please either post a question in the comments on the right or request to join the screen. And of course, you can ask them in person. So that is the intro out of the way. A few talking points to begin with. So I think, Eric and Ronica, if it's okay with you, let's start with Agile basics. So let's look at, first of all, what should I know about Agile? And why is an Agile mindset so important nowadays?
Go ahead, Ronica. You love to start. Uh-oh. Ronica's sound's not coming through.
Yes. Ronica, we can't hear you.
So while she sorts that out, I guess I'll talk about why an Agile mindset's so important.
Please. Yeah, you go for it.
There's really a few different key reasons that I'm looking at. Whenever I work with customers, whenever I look internal, first is why we do it. For me, it's all about the people. It's all about allowing people to achieve their potential. And what we've seen with other ways of addressing technology spend, other ways of writing software, building systems, didn't allow people to actually engage what they cared about. They would try to work, they would have great passion for the work, and it always felt, for myself and for the people around me, like we were trying to overcome the process to do what we felt was important. And that's not the way it's supposed to feel.
Sure.
When we bring it back to more of a a business perspective, it's quite simple. You lose if you don't these days. It's faster, it's more effective, you get higher quality systems. You can, if you do it right, focus more people on a smaller surface area of problems and have more impact in a shorter period of time. And if you don't do that, your competitors will. So it's really not a question for me anymore about why should you. It's, of course you should. Now, how do you do it? How do you get started?
Sure. And I know, traditionally Agile was seen as, a set of practices and processes. And I know that, the shift now is, of course, towards a mindset. I mean, what is the advantages nowadays looking at Agile as a mindset and not just a set of processes?
Yeah, it's really the same as it always was. I mean, you started out with perhaps treating it as I need to go do Scrum, or nowadays it's we need to get started with Safe, and you might see some benefit there. You might see 10%, 20% improvement on your various metrics, but that's insufficient. That's nowhere near what we expect, and frankly, substituting one process for another doesn't really solve the real issues. Mm-hmm. And instead, it's more about why are you going for Agile? What benefits do you need to do? Why is this important for your strategy? Why, or how do you need your people to align to deliver the right value? Now, let's, based on that, figure out what we're going to do.
Excellent. Well, it seems we've lost Ronica for the time being. I think she might be trying to adjust her volume. So, in fact, I think she's trying to join now. So, 2 seconds. So, Ronica, you should be able to join now. Yep, there we go. And let's hope we have sound. Excellent. Good news.
All right, so Eric, did you say smart things?
That's up to the crowd to decide.
Well, Ronica, if you missed Eric's answer, why don't you chime in with yours, and let's see how similar they are.
Why an agility mindset? Why Agile mindset?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you care? I think in today's world, with the level of complexity, what we're trying to build, how many people are involved in building it, the uncertainty. Even in the most what we need to build, it needs to meet these regulatory requirements, that seemingly won't change. There's always technology uncertainty. There's always interpret to get new information. We have to set ourselves up to, it's not about making the perfect plan and following. It's about setting ourselves up.
Again, Ronica.
Have goals. Our human systems aren't set up that way. We're set up to execute on plans, or we're set up to make good plans. This is about a mindset that says, how can I learn? How can I set myself up to learn faster? That's a whole new way of working. That's one piece to me. So feedback, a learning mindset, which is about how we're organized, but it's also how we think. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I still have to be reminded that the goal is not perfect. The goal is learning faster, right? And then the other piece for me, I think, is just about team and collaboration. I mean, we're human animals, we're social animals. To build what we're trying to build requires teamwork. It's not about individuals and how. It's not that it's not about. It is about individuals, but it's about individuals and teams and how they build things of value. Right, by myself, I don't build things of value. I produce value, right? Or I create good things, but the real value comes with when we work together. And so the whole thing becomes, how do you make really effective teams? And it's ultimately leads to better results. It's more satisfying. It's a better way of working. It leads to better ideas, right? So then if everything is about team, how do I help that team collaborate? How do I help that team work well together? How do I help that team work with other teams? How do I think about what we're trying to accomplish in terms of how do I, building teams and putting teams together, rather than focusing on, when we focus on individuals as resources, we tend to be splitting and optimizing in all the wrong places, right? So those two sort of realities of today, I think, make Agile fairly inevitable and certainly a better way.
Great.
At least that's how I feel today.
Changes sometimes.
What I focus on changes, but those are what are hitting me today.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, maybe it'll be interesting for the audience. Let's spend a couple of minutes, and why don't you both talk about, what it is you are working on at the moment? What's interesting you in the agile world right now?
Try it again. After you, Ronica.
Ladies first.
Just kidding. What is interesting me in the agile world right now? That's an excellent question. What have I been working on, do you think, Eric? Eric and I have actually been collaborating quite a bit on, we know how to work with companies to help, really large organizations to help them adopt Agile. But knowing how to do it and being able to explain how you do it and sort of, getting beyond, here's my brain power to what are the patterns we're applying to make that successful has been awesome, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not just, we're going to install some methodology into your engineering organization. It's we're changing. Even in a company where that's all they're thinking about so far is how do I adopt Agile in my engineering organization. It isn't about installing a methodology. It's a mindset change. It's organizational change. And how is it we do that? And it's been fun. It's been fun in that to realize, going back to that whole team thing, that's a big part of then how we do it. We create teams within the organization, leadership teams from the very top all the way down. We're creating teams that guide that shift, right? Because it's not about me or Eric having all the answers. It's not about one leader saying this is what we're going to do. It's about groups of people working in small teams or virtual teams to just navigate the shift, right? Some of it is practices we know to install, but a lot of it is what is going to be the impact of those practices, and are they going to work in this context? And so how do we set up cross-functional leadership teams who can watch that, learn, look at the results, make adjustments?
Great answer.
Right, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I'm recently moving into a role where my job and my team's role is to help CA become more agile, achieve better agility across all the various levels. And I mean, no looking at any individual now that I've opened my mouth, but in any of my recent engagements, including this one, most of the teams know what they're doing. Most of the teams know how to build good software. And it's really about discovering what are the barriers between them and doing what they love to do and getting the systems out of the way. And what's frustrating me is looking back, and my personal blog is titled Rediscovering the Obvious. How many times have we had to recreate the same methods over and over again? As Ronica said, getting it out of our heads and figuring out how to explain it to other people. And that's the part that I'm really interested in is we treat everything like it's complex. We treat everything like it's non-repeatable, and we have to do it slightly differently every time. What are the parts that are repeatable? What are the parts that we can just say, actually this kind of is best practice? Or at least here's the best 3 practices that you probably should pick one of, and here's some heuristics for how to pick which one. And it's not as simple as saying go do Scrum or go do Safe. I kind of wish it was. But there have got to be some things that are important, like the closer you get to continuous deployment, the better off you are. I mean, I think that's a given. I can't think of a context where that hasn't been a best practice. And there's got to be a few of those universal truths that apply in everything we're doing, no matter what context of agility, software, marketing, HR agility, wherever we look.
Right. I've been, as Eric almost kind of alluded to it there. So I've been working with our marketing group here at the Agile Central's marketing team. And so, and I don't just mean, agile marketing, which is all about having hypotheses and testing multiples, A/B testing and all that kind of stuff, but literally adopting agile, like adopting Scrum practices and some safe practices for the marketing team. And it's been I mean, talk about figuring out which practices are universal, right? I mean, there's an assumption going in, we get to question everything, right? Because it's not software development. So how do we know that we still need a team of, 7 plus or minus 2? It's not software development. So what's our version of cross-functional team, that sort of thing. And it's been fascinating. 7 plus or minus 2 really is still the right number. That's based on social theory of how we interact. And when they tried to make smaller teams, it felt the process felt like overkill. And when they tried to make a bigger team, they lost the ability to collaborate closely, and informal sub-teams were created anyway. They've really struggled with the whole idea of cross-functional, right? Cross-functional in a Scrum team is about, what does it take to produce a unit of value? A coder can't develop value by himself. He or she needs a tester, right? What else do they need to get real value out the door? Well, it was funny though, because marketing is really siloed, and they say to themselves, well, we're not doing software development, and my work has nothing to do with your work. And I don't care what you're doing, and it's weird for me to listen in a stand-up, right? I mean, they had this kind of resistance. But when we took a few units of value, if a marketing team puts on a webinar, or a marketing team puts on a Blab event, right? Who are all the people involved? Who can do it? Who do you need to do it at a minimum? And of course, the answer was it's cross-functional. Mm-hmm. And we worked through a few of those. And it reminded me, I feel like it's been a long time since I had to convince a group that developers and testers should really be on a team together. Right? I think that's fairly well understood, but I've had to help marketing run experiments to understand why they should be cross-functional. Right? So yeah, I forgot your blog was called Rediscovering what was it? Rediscovering the Obvious? Rediscovering. Mm-hmm. I love that.
I average about one post a year, so I can't really say it's active.
That must be why I forgot. Have you forgotten to rediscover?
Oh, here we go. So we have our first question just come in. So that's a great way to start. So how do you recommend a marketing team start applying Agile to their planning and processes? So open the floor.
Great question.
I guess from anywhere, no matter what work you're doing, marketing is a little easier to trace this. You've got to start with understanding kind of the end-to-end. What are all the things that actually need to be done to go from, we think we might want to put a campaign out there, for example, or we have a new product coming that maybe we should do a little bit of marketing around it, to the point that you've delivered the campaign, you've followed up on it, you've measured its impact, you've understood whether it's accomplished the goals or not, and you've figured out how you do that differently the next time. And all of that, including that feedback cycle, at that point, you kind of just ask, well, who needs to be involved? Who do we know that can do this stuff with us? And it might involve some of your vendors. It might involve a creative department. It may involve any number of different roles. But those are the people you have to get involved. And that's kind of the group I would start with. Now, you might have different subsets within that group. It might make sense to do some work here and then give it to another group to operate. We can play with those conversations, but until you actually understand that end-to-end, there's really not a lot of point in getting started, because you're not necessarily going to get the results you want.
I like that. I had the advantage with our team of kind of starting with an end-to-end. It wasn't a massive marketing group. It was small enough. And so our starting point was form teams of, actually, I take that back. That was not our starting point. Our starting point was, because they started sort of before they enlisted my help. The real starting point was begin to make work more visible. There, in terms of our group, one of the big drivers for even trying Agile was they had tons of work in process, and due to an internal shift, we're getting a lot of sort of ad hoc, sort of surprise requests. So lots of work in progress and lots more coming in a very interrupt-driven way. And it was hard to know, they knew intuitively that they can't do it all and get anything done. Eventually, you have so much work in the system that everything, it's like filling the highway, right? It grinds to a halt at rush hour. And so but they didn't know how to know what to say no to. And so their first step was, well, let's make all the work visible, organize it into sort of the equivalent of features, but like larger bits of, things add up to real goals we're trying to accomplish. And then begin to understand, if this is all of our work and this new thing comes in, where in the priority order does it fit? And they started using sort of a Kanban board, a Kanban process, in our case through Agile Central, of course. But how can they at least just see the work and start tracking how long it takes to get things done and their capacity? But that was just the start. And then it still felt too hard to see. And so the second step was form Scrum teams or Agile teams. And, cross-functional, more or less, 7 plus or minus 2, more or less in size. They were almost paralyzed by not being able to figure out who should be on which team. And the big thing was, we're not going to get it right the first time. Let's just try something. Right. And then they decided to start working in iterations just so that they could have frequent touch points of get together, understand priorities, collaboratively build a plan for the next 2 weeks, execute on the plan, retrospect to figure out what did we learn about what we can do or how we work together, and make a new plan. Right. So those are the sort of the first, I guess, steps 1, 2, 3 of getting started.
Yeah, and I think that's really boils down to one of the biggest messages we have is get started. I mean, you can spend that. I've literally watched a company take a year and a half to talk about how they would adopt Agile, and in the meantime, I had an insurance company I worked with that, in the same period, who I didn't even start talking to until after I started working with that other company, launched a total of 7 release trains, which is about a total of 500 people, and delivered a new business that is, in certain ways, leading its industry now. So when you look at that, it's like, let's just do it. Let's see what we can do and give people an incentive and a motivation to keep fixing it. Don't hold them accountable to what goes wrong. Hold them accountable to making it right. And that really drives everything. I mean, we get people focused on whatever that value delivery unit is. Veronica used the word features. It could be a campaign again if you're in marketing. It could be a new feature if you're in software. In my wife's case, it's actually a new course that she's delivering into the schools she works with. The first organizing principle for improvement becomes what we call sustainable shortest lead time. How can you do it in a shorter time? But how can you do it in a shorter time over and over again without everything falling apart underneath you? And if you do that and you are actually solving the whole problem, you eventually will get to something that looks like Agile. There are some practices you can use to get you there faster, but I've watched it happen where teams that really don't know any of the theory, don't know any of the practices, just said, we need to do this faster, and started focusing on eliminating anything that was slowing them down while maintaining quality, and they got to great results. And they're perhaps one of the most Agile teams I've ever seen, even though they didn't know they were doing Agile. And I've heard of other coaches who have run into the same thing in very similar circumstances where you're actually doing great. Don't adopt Agile, because you'll break what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, and when you take that mindset, again, the practices of a Scrum or a Kanban help you get started, but that mindset is always staying focused on the goal. What are we trying to accomplish, right? Is it faster time to market? Is it just fewer fire drills in the course of, what we're building or what we're running? What is it? And keep coming back to what you're solving for. And then it becomes about principles, right? Believing that, and it's, I don't know, anytime you ask two Agilists, what are the core principles of Agile? You'll get 5 answers.
So I shouldn't do that then. Okay.
5 different. Well, but I can say a few things, right? I know it's about making work visible so that we can, make better trade-off decisions, work on the right things, get the best value. Making work visible also is what allows you to empower everyone to, we always talk about empowered teams. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means teams in which everyone on the team can contribute to making smart decisions about what to work on or what to build or how to build it. And if everyone can see the work, then everyone can contribute to those smarter decisions, right? So there's a big thing about making work visible, and that was a big part of what the marketing group did. There's a big piece around optimizing for the whole, right? So don't think of the big picture, right? Getting my work done. I've had days, right? Just to bring it back to you as an individual, right? You have a day where you're busy, you're doing things, and you're doing things, and you kind of feel good, but you kind of know in the back of your mind, did I really work on the right things? Did I really work on the things that had the highest value? When we talk about making work visible, it's also about making visible how valuable that work is, and value is bigger than myself, right? So that's. I don't know, there's 2 principles somewhere in there, maybe 3, I don't know.
Now you're starting to see why that's the case.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
And it is dependent on the day, because if you would have asked me, 13, 14 years ago, as I was first discovering Agile, I would have probably quoted the manifesto at you. And I said, of course, these are what matter.
Right.
And you asked me again a couple years later, and I would have perhaps quoted the Kanban method at you. And then a few years after that, it would have just been some of the basic principles of Lean and the House of Quality and things like that. And when I look now, it's kind of all of those things boiled it down. Let's look at the full value stream and understand everything you have to do. Let's really focus on continuous improvement and making it faster and better and more sustainable and better for the business. Let's make it visible so that we can limit how much we do and focus instead of splitting our efforts across too many things. If you do those 3, you will get a better process. Extending that, you start looking at the people, and remember that it's not machines doing this work for you. I mean, yes, we talk about IT operations, and we can get down to a lot of great automation, but that's a different problem than what we're solving. And what we should be looking at is that value streams are made up of people. And if you get those people working together better, if you manage the social relationships and the social networks in the organization, you'll get a better organization, which then can go and release more value and do what it does better. And then beyond that, it's okay, let's not get sued. Let's not violate the law. Let's not violate ethics. So let's put some minimal guardrails into place to make sure that, we actually are, say, reporting CapEx in a meaningful way. We are organizing effectively across groups, because we've got 3,500 engineers, not 5 engineers. And we might want a little bit of alignment there. And then perhaps you put a little extra structure in to help people learn from each other, because I don't care how good the social network is inside a company, thousands of people is a lot of people. And it'd be great if we weren't rediscovering the obvious, at least inside the same company. So, I mean, those kind of 6 things, at least today, are really the 6 basics I look at. If people and organizations can focus on those 6 things, you're going to end up in a much better place. And you may not get immediately the 4x improvement or the 10x improvement we've seen in some places, but you'll start getting incremental improvement, 25, 30% easily. It kind of like going back to our Rally founder and our CTO I'm sorry, what's his title? He's in the office of CTO managing innovation at CA now, Ryan Martins.
Yes.
I loved it. He stood up in front of a group of 100 managers, the top managers in the company, and said, Agile is easy. Throw away half your work. And that right there will get you probably 40% improvement on the other half if you let people focus.
Absolutely.
So some of it's quite easy. It's really hard to do, but it's quite easy in principle.
Well, while we're on this subject then, I mean, some of the people watching us now, They're going to be in various stages of their agile journey. But let's say someone hasn't started their journey just yet, but they'd like to. So first of all, what does the agile journey look like to both of you? And most importantly, what advice or what steps would you suggest people first take on that journey?
I'm still trying to think how to do that without a whiteboard.
There is one behind you.
There is one behind me. Fortunately, I can't erase what's on it now. What does that journey look like? What does that journey look like, Eric?
I think it fundamentally has to start with understanding what problem you're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. If people come back and start asking me to do Agile for Agile's sake, my first question is always why. And if the answer is because the company next door that's kicking our butts is doing it, well, that's a good incentive, but that's not the right reason. Right? And it becomes, what do you need it to provide as a benefit? Because if you don't think about that, if you don't keep that goal in mind, you'll never get there. And then beyond that, it's let's figure out what that value stream is. Where do we want to start in the organization? Where does this improvement have the most impact to our company? And from there, it almost gets into going through the motions, but those motions involve helping a lot of people change their mindsets. So it's never easy, but the path is fairly straightforward.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. And that another way I think about it, or another part of that journey, then is having understood why we're doing it. It's what we were saying earlier. Just get started. So whether just get started means start a pilot team, a couple of scrum teams, or a group, a division, or not a division, sorry, what we would call a train. Well, I was thinking a train, right? But you got to start somewhere. You've got to get some people doing it. They have to be doing it on a meaningful piece of work, right? If you have that crazy little project over there is doing Agile, then when it succeeds, no one will care. They'll say, oh, well, that was a special project, so that's not replicable in the rest of our company. So you pick something meaningful, but not so business critical that everyone's afraid to make a mistake. Right? This is a journey of learning, right? So you find that place to start, and then you just start. But the important thing is, we talk about learning. Agile is all about learning. You're going to learn from those first people, that first group. Yeah. So somebody needs to be watching it, right? So there's that coalition of leaders who hold the purpose in mind and help that beginning group sort of see themselves, and they're retrospecting, they're learning, they're saying, okay, what are we learning about what's easy and hard about doing Agile in this organization? And then let's apply those lessons to the next groups and the next groups. And more importantly, that group that started is going to start getting benefits, right? Whatever that is, cost savings, a little more value out the door, a little value out the door sooner, and those improvements pay for the next set of experiments, right? I mean, Agile should be adopted iteratively and incrementally, right? Ultimately.
You might say use an Agile approach to adopt Agile.
Absolutely, I would say that. In fact, I often do.
And you hit on one thing in there, Ronica, that we can never let go of, is make sure that the people that are fiscally and in many cases emotionally responsible for the group are involved. One of the perhaps mistakes made a long time ago with Scrum was that we actively pushed managers out of the room. And I never quite understood it, but it was kind of like what everybody said. It was about the team and get those managers out of there. And you had that stuff around pigs and chickens even. And it was like, well, no, let's not do that. Let's get the people who know everybody in the organization, the people who have responsibility and authority in this space involved. But let's not get them involved one at a time. Let's actually get them involved and help them form into teams of managers.
Yes.
So when I talk about all of those things that had to be done to get something out the door, let's get all the managers who have people necessary to do that work together and ask them to work together on how they're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Make them team before at scale we ask all of their teams to do it.
Yep.
And I'm just going to jump right on Robin's
please do,
because it's an accurate position. You don't change the culture. I'm going to presume you're talking, Robin, about corporate cultures, not about ethnic cultures or nationalities or things like that. But when you look at corporate cultures, I honestly generally just kind of pretend the culture is not there, and I start getting people to behave differently. And get a team of managers to behave differently. Get a pair of sponsors who span silos in an organization and get them to behave a little bit differently and ask different questions. And suddenly you'll notice 4 or 5 months later that your culture has changed significantly because people are just going to see those leaders acting differently and working together. And if my boss is working with that guy who he used to really argue with in public and private, well, maybe I should work with his people. And then she will go and work with those people. And suddenly you get teams of managers and contributors that ignore old boundaries. And
Absolutely.
your culture has changed. And it just keeps going down that path.
And in other areas too, I want to link what you just said exactly to what you were saying about managers, right? We used to have this mistake of sort of trying to kick out the managers, but really those original agilists, their problem wasn't with managers who are people, but with old management style and old management mindsets, right? And those managers were fine people who were, using the tools and mindsets that had made them successful up to now and served them up to now, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so the shift is, like he said, if you're working with people to behave differently, that's what begins to change culture and mindset and results and everything, right? And you just and so because they're people, you challenge them to be leaders in a whole nother way. You provide them a team and a mission, right? And the mission is a lot around looking for solutions in different places. The solution isn't to make a plan and meet the plan. The solution is to amplify learning. The solution is to make sure that perfect doesn't get in the way of good, to reimagine what enough is, right? All these things. And as you challenge those leaders and managers to do it, then, as he said, it models a different behavior. It's interesting to pay attention to, I think what I've noticed when I work with companies, whatever their culture, corporate culture to begin with, some things that are built into who they are and how they work actually work really well with Agile. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's exactly how we think. I think about a company where being collaborative was actually pretty natural for them. But then you'll find other parts aren't, and they don't. I think the key is you don't look at it in the very beginning and say, oh my gosh, this company has a culture of competition and secrecy, and so Agile is never going to work there. No. And you don't do the opposite. You don't say, well, first let's fix the culture of competition and secrecy, and then we'll start doing Agile, right? It's like you start doing Agile, you engage the leaders, you begin encouraging the behaviors that you want to see, and it shifts. That company that was based on competition, there was one in particular I worked with. The shift was really just challenging the leaders to outdo each other on transparency and mentorship.
Nice.
That's a Jedi trick.
I think it's really interesting when you start to look at what aspects of the existing cultures are important, because some of the I'll stereotype them as valley companies actually don't have the right culture to get started, even though they're the ones that everybody thinks are the natural environment for Agile. A lot of the insurance companies I've worked with are actually people who have demonstrated over and over again that they know how to care for people as people and that they're going to be thinking of it in terms of how do we work forward together long term within our business, not they don't have the competitive ego issues that you see in the Valley. Certain foreign cultures, as I've traveled around the world, the willingness to just go try something and do it without arguing about it for 6-8 months first is phenomenal, and is something that, again, we're very good at discovering all the reasons why we shouldn't do Agile instead of actually getting started.
Right.
I worked with a railroad company. Actually, I've worked with two now, and both of them had such a culture of safety and discipline that once they realized that it was the same thing, their code quality and their ability to stay focused on what mattered was phenomenal. And it just becomes a matter of recognizing what are those really powerful aspects of the culture that you want to capture, and amplifying them rather than focusing your attention on all the things that are yucky and inappropriate. No, let's look at the good stuff. Let's amplify that good stuff, and then start improving.
Yeah, build on what works. Build on, it's the philosophy and the strengths finder, right? Amplify your strengths, remediating what you're bad at. Nobody wants to be told they're terrible at something, and focus on that, right? Focus on what you're good at. It's absolutely true.
Okay. And there's two questions left on my agenda, so let's start with this. What would you say to someone who has the perception that Agile, whether it's an Agile mindset or Agile processes, are specifically for large, complex teams? Is Agile for small teams as well?
That's where it started.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think more often the perception's the opposite, right? People are afraid that it's only for small teams because that's how it started. Scrum used to talk just about 10-person teams working individually. XP teams tended to be small, but there's too much goodness for it to stay there, and we've worked with dozens and dozens and hundreds of organizations who are truly large, massive enterprises, and they're making Agile work, and the frame and the sort of theory has caught up with it. People made it work in real life, and then the frameworks to repeat that have been created. So SAFe, the Scaled Agile framework, and Disciplined Agile delivery. Dad, I'm like, whatever that stands for. Large scale Scrum. It's and honestly, I think all those frameworks on some level describe fractals, right? You do it in large enterprises through teams of teams. You still have the team as the sort of core resource unit. But if you need 100 people to build software, your particular application, then you don't have a 100-person team. You have 10-person teams, plus all the folks that go with them to help them stay organized and communicating and with the work visible and being successful. And then those teams, those trains of 100 are, and then you have trains and trains connected into value streams and whatnot. And that, to me, that concept of fractals is what makes, not only just what makes Agile work in reality, but I also think what kind of helps with the mind-bogglingness of it, right? Agile in a huge enterprise can feel a little mind-boggling, but if you just think of those fractals, it becomes really quite simple. You keep repeating up. So whereas a Scrum team manages a backlog of stories, an entire train or a value stream manages a backlog of features, and a business unit has a backlog of initiatives, and they're all managed in a fairly similar way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when you talk about the numbers and the mind-bogglingness aspect, there's some really important thinking that hides in there. I mean, we've all heard that humans can remember a list of 7 items, and that's kind of the limit. And you can play with the numbers, and I can remember like 3 or 6 apparently. But when you start to look at that, I mean, but one of the insurance companies are referenced. One group is routinely doing 300 stories per iteration. That doesn't even, you can't comprehend that. No single person is actually ever going to read all of those. So we have to build that sense-making capability at the next level up. What is that language that we use to talk about what 500 people are doing? It's not stories. We've been doing those for a decade, and they're great for a 10-person team. And the 10-person team needs them still. But we have to wrap them in something. And if you use SAFe, we call that features. And then you look at that same group, and, well, they're actually doing 30 or 40 features every 2 weeks. Well, same problem rears its head again. How do you make sense of those? So for those large organizations, we just add in another concept above it, call them, say, capabilities or something like that. And you build up that fractal structure Ronica was talking about until you get to the point where you can make sense of it all. And now you've hit that first criteria that we mentioned at the beginning. You can now see your work. Right. Now let's find where the problems are and improve the flow where it's blocked, so that we don't have to micromanage all 300 stories or in one group 3,000 stories. Right. We can go find out which 5 stories have issues and devote management attention to helping unblock those.
Right. Well, and so then I'll bring in another element that is a word I wrote down all the way back when we talked about how to get started, which is cadences. Right. So the work needs to be rolled up till we can see it. The other thing that's incredibly human about us is we love cadences. We think in cadences and rhythms. Right. You have your rhythms of the work week, Monday or the week, Monday to Sunday. In fact, we're all a little off today because Tuesday, at least in the U.S., we're starting our week after a holiday Monday, right? We have rhythms of months. We have rhythms of, seasons, which of course in business is quarters. We have the rhythm of years. In Agile, part of how we help those very large groups collaborate together effectively is through a series of cadences and aligning those cadences. So in that train of 10 teams, 100 people, all 10 teams are on the same, say biweekly iteration cadence. And even the teams that don't use iterations, so they aren't bound by time boxes, they'll still have a similar cadence of sort of reviewing work and reflecting on accomplishments. We'll have a quarterly cadence or thereabouts of where that whole group plans a little farther ahead in terms of what features are, what stories are they going to do and which iterations to add up to value. We also want then the business unit and the corporate entity. So those are the people working on the software, but the corporate entity should be working on a similar cadence of business steering. And so we have strategies that we set at the beginning of the year. We don't set them and forget them. We revisit every quarter and come together as a leadership group. What do we need to do to steer our plans and our strategy in order to continue to meet our goals? These aligned cadences also make sense. It's not 50 out of sync project plans with, start and end dates. It's just a continuous synchronized cadence of planning work, executing on work, reflecting on work, planning the next set of work, being able to take in new information, know what to do with it.
Yep. Yeah, it's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're heading into the final 10 minutes now. So I have one, final topic I'd like you guys to discuss. But of course, if there's anybody out there that has, as I said, any challenges that they're facing in their Agile journey, any questions, no matter how big, small, complicated, seemingly easy, please do send them in while we still have time. But while we're waiting for that, let me pose this final topic. I know it's a very, very complex topic, and maybe this is more of a teaser to potentially a future session. But let's see how we can get started. So how do Agile and portfolio planning intersect? Who wants to tackle that first?
I'll do my normal thing and just ignore the question entirely and ask, why are they different things?
Yes.
There we go.
How are they not asking the same question? Agile is all about, if you boil it down, Agile is all about effectively spending money on technology, at least the way we've applied it in the software domain. And portfolio management is choosing what money to spend on software and why. And if the two don't match your strategy collectively and nearly perfectly, then you're missing out on a lot. You're going to get some disconnects. You're going to get people that are passionately working on things that don't matter. Or you're going to get to a point where you realize that you've got hundreds of beautiful strategies and thousands of innovation activities, and until you can learn to execute, they don't matter. So it's not that they're the same or different. It's just they're two parts of being successful in building technology at scale.
Great.
Absolutely. And I would go back to kind of what we were just saying about applying Agile at the enterprise. You're applying a lot of the same principles and practices, just at another level and at another sort of size, if you will, right? So a portfolio planning process, an Agile portfolio planning process, would talk about, maybe not. You need to know your spend up front. You need a budget, but your spend is really, instead of it being a function of what would it cost me to get these 10 things, it becomes how much do I want to invest on, say, the software technologies that will enable my business. And given that investment, how do I make sure I spend it as wisely as possible? Well, then I flip my focus from a cost to investment and value. And so then I look at the list of things we could work on this year, and rather than commit to them all at once, which is basically to put them all in progress immediately and thus have too much WIP, instead we're going to say, how do we rank that list of investments? Which ones should we start now? How can we set ourselves up to deliver on them sooner, get value from them as soon as possible, and then continue to measure. Instead of measuring, are we on plan, on budget, on time, on budget? Instead, we're going to measure, are we still getting value from this investment? Is this still the most important thing to be working on? And we steer on a cadence to say, is it time to move to a different investment? Is it time to put more, spend more energy on this next thing on the stack, and then to constantly manage the stack? Are there new innovations that are coming out of our own organization, or new opportunities out in the marketplace that says we need to switch how we're spending our money and what we're spending it on? So, I mean, that's a way it's sort of, I'm not really arguing with Eric because we rarely disagree, but but you need people who don't agree as much on these things to be more fun. But in that way, we are radically changing the portfolio planning process when you adopt Agile. We're turning it on its head. We're turning it upside down. But we're applying exactly the same principles and practices, really, that we do at the team level. So it's not rocket science, although there's a few things around, CapEx and OpEx and all that change in an Agile world. And oops, I think we're out of time. No, just kidding. Those are big topics for sure. But they're not unsolvable, and they're not unsolved. They're so there is, it's just adding a fuller picture of the business. At the end of the day, it looks a lot like Agile.
Yeah. Just as a side comment, with one of our customers, it actually was rocket science, but that's different. But I want to highlight something that Ronica mentioned in there, but it's worth calling out and making it incredibly clear. One of the things we do with portfolio planning in an Agile process very explicitly is we separate the decisions about how much to spend and how much capacity we have from what are we going to spend that capacity on. And those two things, the difference there dramatically simplifies. And it's usually pretty obvious in an IT space. It's like, oh, well, I had 800 people last year. Let's call that 82 Scrum teams. I'm probably going to have plus or minus 10% this year, so let's call it 82 Scrum teams. Now, part two of the question, what do I want to spend 82 Scrum teams on? We went through that with one of CA's biggest portfolios just a couple of weeks ago. And once you got past the financial aspects, which is very hard but doable, then you could get into what's the most important work to do, which is also very hard but doable. Trying to conflate the two and do that in the presence of a strategy that may or may not be well articulated, that's almost impossible. And that's why you get the portfolio process dragging on and consuming weeks or months of time. I remember one of our relatively small customers the impact of just doing the planning was $7 million of productivity lost in the last 2 months of the year. And that was a significant, I think it was like 12% of their budget, if I remember. I mean, Ronnie, you know which case study.
Those numbers sound about right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you start to look at those things like, oh, well, let's just simplify. Let's do strategy deployment. After we figure out what our strategy is, we'll articulate it clearly and we'll deploy it down through multiple levels. As part of that, we'll send the finance along with it, and we'll make progressive financial decisions about how much of our attention in terms of our run rate do we want to allocate to each of these things. And then we look the next level down and it becomes, okay, well, we've got 12 teams. What do we want to do in the first quarter with those 12 teams? And since we know there's most of the work that we're not going to do in the first quarter, let's get most of that, put it on the shelf. We'll come look at it in 3 months and pay attention to those first 3 months, maybe 3.5, because it's really hard to limit WIP. But we've simplified. And then we'll toss the rest into something we'll call a roadmap, and we'll check in on it periodically. And for most industries, not all, but for most industries, that's actually sufficient. There are places where you're making larger, longer-term commitments to customers. I mean, if you're selling, I hate to use military analogy, but if you're selling bombers to a government, you kind of need to tell people when you're going to deliver it. Right. And that's a 5 or 7 year program. But for most contexts, you don't need that kind of predictability. You don't need that lockdown of exactly what's going to happen on a certain date and hour 12 months from now. And it gets a lot easier just to say, let's simplify the problem, figure out who we have to do the work, manage it in terms of scrum teams or release trains if you have a lot of people, and figure out what are we going to do first, talking at the right level, those 5 to 7 things. And then we'll do the next one, the next one, the next one.
And as you do that, the longer you do it, going back to get started now, why wait? The longer you do it, the better you get at understanding. Like, I mean, everyone wants to know, if I keep my spend the same, or if I increased my spend, my IT spend by 20%, what would that get me? Well, as you work this way, it does get easier to then look at the stack of potential investments and say, you know what, that might get us to that next investment, right? Or that might get us a little more slack and space to jump on opportunities or to react to disruptions in the market, which is what we expect, right? So you begin to get to where you can talk about what you get for your money, but for the most part, you know, it's much easier to decide what our investment's going to be, and then just keep optimizing it, keep making sure we're working on the highest value things, and work on creating an organization that has the flexibility to where if you change priorities, it's not a reorg, it's merely a redeployment. It's trivial. That's really the goal of Agile.
Well, that's a great ending note. That was summarized perfectly. And again, it opens, topics for the future. So if there are no other questions, I'll let Eric and Ronica get back to their very, very important work. But thank you so much for joining us. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I hope everyone else has. I've posted some links in the comments section. This is our social network. This is where we're sharing all of our new videos, all of our Agile Week content, including some great videos featuring Ronica and Eric. So go check those out. There'll be lots more to come this week, so stay tuned. And well, guys, thank you very much. Enjoy your days.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Cheers.